They kept sending their floodwater into my yard, so one day I sent it back. Not with a lawsuit, not with a shouting match, just with dirt, stone, and a little patience. I live in a quiet subdivision outside Cedar Ridge, North Carolina, the kind of place where people wave when they drive by, but don't necessarily know your middle name. My wife and I bought this house 12 years ago when our twins were still in elementary school. The backyard was what sold us. It slopes gently away from the house, big red maple off to the right, enough space for a grill, a dog run, and the kind of grass you can walk barefoot on without stepping on gravel or ant hills. It felt like ours in a way the rest of the world doesn't always feel. Summers here are dramatic. Storms roll in like they've got something personal to prove. You'll get an afternoon where the sky turns greenish-gray, thunder rattles the windows, and rain falls so hard it looks solid. Then an hour later the sun comes out, and everything steams like a sauna. It's just part of living here. You deal with it. The first puddle showed up late May, after one of those gully washers. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, looking out the window while drying a plate, and noticing a wide patch of water near the back fence. Nothing crazy, just a shallow sheet reflecting the clouds. I figured the ground was saturated. We'd had 3 storms that week. It dried up the next day, so I didn't give it another thought. Second storm, same spot, only bigger. Not a puddle anymore, more like a shallow pond. It sat there 3 full days. The grass in that area turned darker, almost bruised looking. When I walked over it, my boots sank half an inch and made that squelching sound nobody likes. That's when I started paying attention. Behind our property, the house had just been renovated. New owners, young couple, early 30s maybe. His name was Brandon. I'd met him once when they moved in. Firm handshake, clean truck, the kind of guy who talks about resale value like it's a hobby. They redid everything. Fresh concrete patio, clean geometric landscaping, brand new gutters that gleamed in the sun. It looked sharp, I'll give them that. And then there was the pipe. It stuck out from the back wall of their house, white PVC, maybe 4 inches wide, angled slightly downward and pointed straight at my yard. It wasn't subtle. It looked like a small cannon mounted on their foundation. At first I assumed it was temporary. Maybe the contractor hadn't buried it yet. Maybe it was part of some unfinished drainage system. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions. You try to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially when you share a fence line. Then the next storm came. I happened to be home that afternoon. The sky cracked open and rain hammered down in sheets. I was at the kitchen window again, same sink, same view. And that's when I saw it. Water poured off their new concrete patio like a waterfall. It rushed toward the back corner, disappeared into that white pipe, and then blasted out in a concentrated stream straight into my lawn. Not a gentle trickle, a steady, forceful jet that carved a shallow channel in the grass within minutes. I just stood there watching, towel in my hand, feeling something shift in my chest. Their yard stayed dry, perfectly usable. No pooling, no mud. All that runoff, redirected with surgical precision, ended up on my side of the fence. By the time the storm passed, that shallow pond had returned, only now it was deeper. The surface rippled where the stream had been hitting. It didn't feel accidental anymore. The next morning I walked over and knocked on Brandon's door. He answered in gym shorts, holding a coffee mug with some real estate logo on it. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. "I wanted to talk to you about that drainage pipe in your backyard." He blinked like he hadn't thought about it at all. "What about it?" "It's sending a lot of water into my yard. I've got standing water back there now after every storm." He took a sip, shrugged. "Water flows downhill, man. That's just gravity." "Sure," I said, nodding. "But this isn't exactly natural flow. It's being directed." He leaned against the doorframe, casual as can be. "The contractor said it's standard. Meets code. Everybody's got to deal with rain." Technically true. We all deal with rain. But we don't usually aim it. "I'm not trying to start anything," I said, "just wondering if there's a way to redirect it so it doesn't dump straight into my yard." "If there's an issue," he replied, already stepping back inside, "you'd have to talk to the contractor. It's his design." And just like that, the door closed. I did call the contractor. Left a message. He called me back 2 days later. "System meets code on their property," he said flatly. "Once water leaves their boundary, it's considered surface flow." Surface flow. That phrase stuck with me longer than I expected. It sounded technical, neutral, almost innocent. Like the water just wandered over on its own. but I'd seen the pipe. I'd watched it fire like a hose under pressure. After the next big storm, the muddy patch in my yard didn't dry for a full week. Mosquitoes started hovering in the evenings. My dog avoided that side entirely. I found myself staring out the window more often, waiting for clouds like a man expecting trouble. And somewhere between the third and fourth storm, something shifted inside me. I stopped being annoyed. I started paying attention. I started documenting everything. Not in a dramatic way at first. I just took my phone out during the next storm and filmed from the kitchen window. You could see the rain coming down, the patio glistening, and then that pipe lighting up like it had a job to do. The water shot out in a clean arc and landed in the exact same spot in my yard every time, like it had coordinates programmed in. I zoomed in, panned out, showed the pooling, narrated the date and time like I was recording evidence for a nature documentary nobody asked for. After that, I filmed every storm. I took photos of the grass turning yellow around the edges. I measured how long the water sat there. I even stuck a cheap yardstick in the mud one afternoon just to see how deep it got. 2.5 inches at the worst point. Not catastrophic, but not nothing either. My wife, Claire, noticed what I was doing. "You building a case?" she asked one evening, leaning against the counter while I replayed a clip. "I don't know yet," I said. "I just want to understand what's happening." She looked out the window toward the fence. "It's not what's happening," she said quietly. "It's that he doesn't care." That part hit harder than I expected. See, Brandon and I weren't enemies. We weren't friends either. Just neighbors who nodded when taking out trash. But there was something about the way he dismissed it. The shrug. The gravity joke. Like the inconvenience was invisible because it wasn't happening on his lawn. I pulled up the county website one night after dinner. Searched stormwater drainage regulations for Cedar Ridge. It took some digging, but I found it. A line buried in a PDF about residential runoff. You cannot concentrate stormwater discharge and direct it onto an adjacent property. Diffuse flow is permitted. Directed discharge is not. I read that sentence 3 times. Diffuse flow is fine. Water wandering downhill naturally, spreading out, soaking in. Directed discharge, meaning pipes, channels, anything that gathers it and sends it somewhere specific, that's different. I didn't file a complaint. Not yet. Part of me wanted to march into the county office with my little folder of videos and photos and let someone official handle it. But another part of me didn't want to be that neighbor. The guy who escalates straight to paperwork. I kept thinking there had to be a way to handle it without turning the street into a courtroom. Around that time, the HOA sent out one of their friendly reminder emails about lawn maintenance and exterior improvements requiring approval. Brandon had just finished his renovation, and I remember overhearing him one Saturday arguing on the phone in his driveway. "They approved the patio," he said loudly. "They approved the drainage plan." That word hung in the air. Plan. So this wasn't an accident. It wasn't unfinished. It was deliberate. The more I watched the water, the more I noticed the slope of our properties. My yard gently dips toward the back fence we share. His yard sits just slightly lower beyond that fence, especially toward the left corner near his unfinished side yard. It's subtle, but it's there. You don't see it unless you're looking. And I was looking. One evening, I walked the fence line with a level and a tape measure, probably looking like I'd finally lost it. But the numbers confirmed what my eyes suspected. If water hit a barrier along my fence and spread sideways instead of pooling in the middle of my yard, gravity would do the rest. It would move toward that low corner on his side. I stood there a long time, staring at the grass, thinking about surface flow. A week later, I called a landscaper named Miguel who'd done work for us before. Good guy. Quiet. Thoughtful. The kind of professional who measures twice without you asking. "I need to improve drainage," I told him. But I wanted to look good. He came out, walked the yard, crouched down near the muddy patch, picked up a handful of soil, and squeezed it. Water dripped between his fingers. "Yeah," he said. "This isn't just rain. It's being fed." I nodded toward the fence. He followed my gaze and spotted the pipe immediately. "Ah," he said softly. "I don't want a trench," I told him. "I don't want something ugly. Just something that protects my lawn." He thought for a minute. Then he sketched a shallow berm along the back fence line. Nothing dramatic. Maybe a foot high at its peak. Shaped like a raised garden bed with stone edging. Hardy plants on top, so it looked intentional. Behind the stone, compacted soil and a gravel core to absorb and redirect water. "It'll stop direct impact," he explained, tracing lines in the dirt with a stick. And if the slope is what I think it is, the water will travel sideways. Toward, I asked. He glanced up at me, reading the unspoken part. Toward wherever gravity takes it. We both knew where that was. When the HOA form came in asking about the improvement, I described it as erosion control and aesthetic enhancement. Which was true. Every word of it. Construction took 2 days. Miguel's crew worked quietly. They laid the stone clean and straight. The plants softened the edge. When it was done, it looked like it had always been there. A tasteful raised bed running along the fence, filled with ornamental grasses and dark mulch. But behind that pretty stone was a ridge. Solid. Packed tight. The next storm rolled in 3 days later. I stood at the same kitchen window, arms folded this time, not pretending I wasn't waiting. Rain came down. Patio flooded. Pipe engaged. The water blasted out like always, confident, focused. It hit the berm and flattened instantly, spreading sideways instead of digging into my lawn. For a moment it just shimmered there, confused, then began sliding along the base of the stone, searching for the lowest point. And then it found it. Slowly, steadily, the redirected stream traveled along the fence line, disappearing around the corner toward Brandon's unfinished side yard. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just watched. The muddy patch in my yard never formed. 2 storms later, there was a knock at my door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. I opened the door, and there stood Brandon, no coffee mug this time, no relaxed lean against the frame. His jaw was tight, shoes muddy. "Hey," he said, glancing past me like he was checking whether I had a camera rolling. "Hey," I answered, calm, neutral. He shifted his weight. "My side yard's been pretty soaked lately. Like, unusable. Didn't used to be like that." I nodded slowly, like I was processing brand new information. "Yeah, we've had some heavy storms." He didn't smile. "I was wondering," he continued, "if you changed something back there." There it was. I stepped outside and pulled the door mostly shut behind me. The air smelled like wet soil and cut grass. You could hear a distant lawn mower somewhere down the street. Life going on like normal. "I did some landscaping," I said. "Built a berm along the fence to protect my yard from standing water. It was getting pretty bad." His eyes flicked toward the fence line. He'd seen it, obviously. Hard not to. "And now," he said carefully, "the water seems to be collecting on my side." I held his gaze. "I didn't redirect anything onto your property. I just prevented direct discharge into mine." That word landed between us. Discharge. He exhaled through his nose. "Look, man, I'm not trying to fight, but my side yard's turning into a swamp." I almost laughed at the symmetry of that sentence. I tried talking about it before. I reminded him gently. When it was my swamp. His face tightened. For a second I thought he might snap back with something defensive, maybe accuse me of being petty, maybe threaten HOA complaints. But instead he looked tired. "The contractor said it was fine," he muttered. "Said it met code." "On your property," I replied. "Once it leaves, it's surface flow." I watched recognition dawn. He remembered the phrase. Surface flow. "Okay," he said after a long pause. "So what would fix it?" That question mattered. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't combative. It was practical. I kept my tone steady. "A proper soak-away. A dry well. Something that absorbs runoff on your side, instead of concentrating it through a pipe." He ran a hand through his hair. "That's going to cost money." I didn't respond. Because yeah, it would. For a moment we just stood there in the humid air, 2 grown men looking at a fence that had become way more symbolic than it should have been. "I wasn't trying to screw you over," he said finally. "I don't think you were," I answered honestly. "I think you were trying to keep your yard dry." He gave a small, reluctant nod. That was the truth of it. He'd invested in that patio, that landscaping, that clean modern backyard. He wanted it usable. He wanted it perfect. And when the contractor offered an easy solution, he took it. Out of sight, out of mind. The problem was, I was the out of sight. A week later, a crew showed up at his house. Different company this time. They dug a trench from the pipe outlet down into his yard, installed an underground extension, and built a gravel pit system designed to slowly disperse water into the soil. I watched from a distance, not gloating, not intervening, just observing the correction. The next storm came on a Thursday evening. I felt that familiar tension as the sky darkened, like waiting for a test result. Rain slammed down, gutters roared, and I stood at my window again. Water rushed off his patio, entered the pipe. But this time, instead of blasting into my yard, It disappeared underground on his side. No arc, no jet, no impact crater in my grass. I walked outside once the rain slowed. My lawn was wet, sure, but evenly wet. Normal rain wet. No pond. No swamp. For the first time in months, the back corner of my yard looked like it belonged to me again. A few days later, Brandon waved when I was bringing in the trash cans. Not the stiff acknowledgement wave from before. Something more human. "Drainage seems better," he called out. "Yeah," I replied. "Looks like it." There was an awkward beat. Then he added, "Should have handled it differently from the start." I shrugged. We both learned something. And that was that. But here's the part that still sits with me. I never filed a complaint. I never threatened legal action. I never yelled. What I did do was protect my own space within the rules that already existed. I forced the issue not by attacking him, but by removing my willingness to absorb the consequences of his convenience. There's a strange clarity that comes from watching water. It always follows the path of least resistance. If you leave yourself open, it will flow right through you. Not maliciously, just because it can. In neighborhoods, in workplaces, in families, it's kind of the same. People don't always mean harm. Sometimes they're just trying to keep their own feet dry. But if the system lets them push the mess downhill, they might not look too closely at where it lands. Building that berm wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, and boundaries have a funny way of revealing truth. Once the water stopped disappearing into my yard, it became visible where it really belonged. It forced a decision. Fix it properly, or live with the swamp. He chose to fix it. Now, every time a summer storm rolls in and I hear thunder shake the windows, I still walk to that kitchen sink out of habit. I look out over the grass, watch the rain fall, watch it soak in evenly. No cannons. No arcs of redirected responsibility. Just rain. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone straight to the county. Maybe it would have escalated. Maybe lawyers would have gotten involved. Maybe we'd be the two houses on the block that don't make eye contact at the annual barbecue. Or maybe he would have fixed it faster. I don't know. What I do know is this. Protecting your space doesn't require shouting. It requires clarity, patience, and sometimes a little strategic landscaping. So here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it the way I did? Should I have filed a complaint from the start? Was building that berm a fair response, or a passive-aggressive move dressed up as gardening? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know how you would have handled it. Because if you've lived in a neighborhood long enough, you know it's never just about water. And if you found this story interesting, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever had to deal with a boundary that needed reinforcing. Trust me, it's better to build the berm before the swamp shows up.